Hey everyone, welcome back. This is part 10 and the third part of us looking at the database schema for our app. So in the last one we covered addresses and we covered contacts, and also we covered why we won't have them as list fields on our business entity. So let's take this a step further now. Let's look at contacts. Now what I want to be able to do is to offer the user the facility to have as many different what I call contact points as they like against each contact. So they can have as many telephone numbers, as many email addresses, as many web addresses, as many Twitter handles, whatever, okay, against each contact that they have. So what I will do with this one is I will put another data type, and this one is going to be called contact point. With our contact point, obviously it needs to be hooked up to a particular contact. So let's start with that then. So we're going to say contact is going to be of type contact, and just draw a line from here to here. And one of the things that I also want to be able to do is to let them name each contact point. So in other words, Dave's mobile or something like that, and it just makes it obvious what type of information that's being stored in this contact point. So the way I would do that is I would have just a description field in there, and the actual information, in other words the actual phone number or the actual email address or the Twitter handle, whatever, I would call info, and that's a type of text as well. So obviously what we need to do then is to determine, well, what type of contact point is it? Is it a telephone number? Is it an email address? Is it, God forbid, a fax number, etc.? So let's copy our option set, because we'll have an option set to store these. And if some great new social media or communication method pops up, we can always just add it into our option set. So let's just call this one contact point type. Okay, and let's just add a few in here. So this is a phone number, email, let's just add a couple more in there, web, and we'll just have Twitter for now. And obviously you can have a dozen of those: Instagram, LinkedIn, all sorts of things, but let's just leave it there for now. So on our contact point, let's add that in there, and we will say that this is a type, and it's going to be CP type. Put that in italic, and let's just draw our little line there. There's a couple of different ways that we can connect the contact to the contact point. Obviously we've got the standard way, which is just the link field from the contact point to the contacts. Again, I'm not going to have the contact points as a list field on contacts for the reasons I explained in the previous video. However, the contact does need to know which is the main telephone number, which is the main email address, which is the main web address. Okay, for let's say these top three contact point types, maybe we should have the main one. If we have a field, actually add it on here, and let's say that we say it's the primary. Okay, and that would be like a yes or no field. Okay, and the idea being with that is that based on the type and based on the contact, you can say, is this a primary, for example, telephone number for this contact? Is it the primary email address for this contact? Now that's great and that works fine. The trouble is you're storing this information against every contact point. But secondly, and most importantly for me, is that every time that that's changed, the primary, you've not just got to set it on the one that they picked to be the primary email or telephone number. You've got to make sure that the other telephone numbers and email addresses are deselected as the primary. And you've got to make sure that only one can be the primary. Okay, and it's just a lot of extra work and a lot of extra logic that we just don't need in the application. So that's the reason I don't use it that way. So let's just get rid of that one. Sorry, pressed the wrong one. So what I would tend to do then is on here, I'll just add 3 more fields. And I will just say primary, I'll just say primary phone CP, okay, for contact point. And that's going to be obviously of type contact point. Okay, and then we can have primary email CP, and let's have one more of primary web CP. Okay, so yes, it lacks a little bit of flexibility, but I just think it's worth it to save us the time of having a primary field on this. That, to be honest with you, unless there's a real critical reason why I need to have that, then doing it this way saves us a lot of logic. If they choose to change, which is their primary telephone number, then it's a simple change in this field. You don't have to go messing around trying to make sure that one's selected, another one's are deselected, etc. So we can point all these up here. It's going to get a little bit messy, but there you go. That's great. So what I would also do on the business entity is also you want to know then, well, who's the primary contact. So again, rather than have a primary on here, I would rather have it on the business entity. So let's add that in. And we will say that that is the primary. My typing goes all to pot when I'm making videos. Primary contact, and that is going to be a contact. Okay, and then we can join there. Okay. Now then, what happens though if, because at the moment we're relying on the contact points, your telephone number, your email, etc., to be based on a contact. What if, for example, that it's a business and you just want to store their main telephone number? Let's say you just want to store their main email address. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to belong to a particular person. You just want it on there to display that information. So what we could do is we could do exactly the same thing as we've done here, is to add a couple of fields. We'll just do it for email and phone number on here. So what we can do then is to say, we will say main phone number contact point, and again that's a contact point. And remember, these are the main data types. These are our container data types. If you remember going back to when we're talking about optimizing our database and talking about data weight and data volume, virtually everything I'm showing you here now will never, if ever, be pulled down in a list. Okay, we're going to talk about list types in a minute, but do you remember we went through different list types where you pull volume down, and then you've got your container types where you pull weight down. So at the moment we're talking about our container types. These are our, as I mentioned before, our one source of truth. Okay, this is where our main data is stored. It's not where we're going to pull a list of information down from. So let's have our main email CP contact point. Okay, and one of the other things with this, having done that, is that the only link to a parent record on a contact point is to the actual contact itself. Well, if we can have contact points that don't necessarily point to a contact, then we also need to make sure that they do anchor themselves to something. Even though we've got these here, which links to them, it's best not to have them floating just on their own. So what we will do then is we will add another field to hook it directly up to a business entity as well. We'll just use BE and put the full type name. Okay, so I hope that all makes sense. We won't draw the lines just now because it's starting to get a little bit busy. Now is a good time to talk about, I actually just brought it up a second ago, now's a good time to talk about list types. As I say, these are all of our container types here. Okay, so you can see that we're kind of drawing this as you would a traditional relationship database. We're creating relationships between tables, but if you can imagine, if you're going to pull all this information down in a list, we're going to have to do a lot of subqueries because we can't do joins in Bubble. We're going to have to do a lot of subqueries. We're going to have to do a lot of nested searches to be able to pull all of this information, to be able to get a list that says the name and their telephone number and their email address and their contact name. That's going to be a lot of subqueries, nested searches that we're going to have to do to pull that down in a list. And again, if you go back to the previous part where I discussed about database optimization, we just don't do that in Bubble. We have list types or satellite types that store that information that we can pull down in a list. So what we're going to need to do then is, let's just drop this down here and bring down our privacy rules, and let's just have a think about our list types. And again, if you're working with a traditional database, if you were working with Supabase or Postgres or MySQL, you wouldn't have to think like this, but we're working with Bubble's database. So we're going to drop another table in there, and we're going to call this one, we're going to call this, remember, pipe business entity. Okay, so we're not worried about volume with this one in terms of data we're bringing down, but we are going to be focused very much on data weight. However, it's got to be functional as well. If you imagine, what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to link it back to a business entity. That's absolutely crucial, that our records in our list types with our pipes at the beginning have to be linked back to its parent record. So I will draw that because that's a really significant relationship that has to be in there. In fact, I will just pop that there. Okay, so when we define our list types, we've just got to think what we're going to drag down into a list and to make it as quick as possible. So what I'd suggest then is that we do need the type as well, because otherwise we're just not going to know whether it's a customer or supplier. And if we need to get a list of just customers, then we obviously need to have a constraint on that. So we're going to need the type as well. Is it going to be a list? Probably not. We're just going to have it as one type. Okay, and I'll explain that later on. Again, we're going to need the subscription stuff. We're going to need the org stuff in there for the privacy rules purposes again, but we'll take that as read for now on this. We're just looking at what we need in this list type. So we've got a primary contact. So we're definitely going to need who that primary contact is. And let's just say that's a first name. And we'll just make this a bit bigger. And that's going to be type text. And let's just add a few in here. Okay, then we're going to need contact last name. And what we're also going to need then is we've got a main phone number and we've got a main contact point number. However, let's focus on the contact. We've got the contact first name, the contact last name. So we're going to need their main contacts information. So we're going to need their primary phone number, their primary email, primary web, okay, for that particular contact. So let's just store contact. We'll just put phone. And again, we're not going to store a contact point because that would require us, just like we've got it in here, to go back to the server and do another search to say get us the contact. In the list types, we're avoiding any kind of nested search. The whole point of the list type is that the data is duplicated in here, so it makes it super fast to display in a list. So it's just going to simply be text. And again, contact, email, text. Let's just drag these down because we're going to need to add a good few more fields. Okay, and let's add 1 or 2 more. Okay, and so what we can do there, let's go back up here. We need then the actual contact's main phone number. So if you imagine that's your primary contact, that's the primary contact's phone number and their email. It's not necessarily the business entity's main phone number, because they could have something different. So we're going to need those in the list as well. So we can then say that is going to be main phone. Just leave it at phone, and we're also going to need the main email. Okay, so therefore in a list we can simply query this, and we're going to get all of who the contact's name is, all of that information. We obviously need the name of the actual business entity. That should have been at the top, but anyway. Okay, and then what you can do is once they pick on an item in the list, you can say, okay, go and get me all the contacts for this. And that's a query, but it's only being done at the point that the user requests it, and they can expect a slight delay. What they're not going to put up with is that same delay repeated 30 times or 100 times for the number of records that are going to be displayed in the list. So that's why we do this. You know, we covered this extensively previously, but I just wanted to reaffirm it while we're doing this. So what we haven't got actually on there is, if we can got the room to do it, is to have like a main web CP that we would use. Okay, and then we could also, we can drag these down a little bit. I've got that quite a high font actually, but once we get a bit more into it and we've got adding more and more, we'll probably reduce the font size. So okay, so we can add then the main web underneath the name. Again, that's the type of text. So you can see that we're defining here all of the information that we just want to get in a straight list, so we can get that information in front of the user rather than trying to pull it from all of these different tables. Okay, we do need these different tables because of the way that we're storing multiple addresses, multiple contacts, multiple contact points per contact, etc. You know, to get that information from these tables, which are our container types, is just going to render your application completely unperformant. Whereas doing it this way in a list, okay, it means duplicating data. Again, I'm going over old ground here, but optimized for reads over writes. And yeah, so we'll leave that there anyway. We'll sort of close it off there, but I hope that's given you some insight there into what it is that we're doing in terms of being as flexible as we possibly can in allowing the user as many addresses, as many contacts, and as many contact points as they need to store, so they're not limited at all, and they can even give each contact point its own description. It could be Dave's mobile number, or you know, Sally's landline number, or whatever it may be, and it gives them a lot of flexibility. But that does cause problems in terms of getting that information down in a list. But it doesn't, because we simply duplicate that information and then pull it into a list type to show. And we can do it very quickly by simply having one search that pulls all this data down. We don't then have nested searches in here. The only time we'll need to run another search to get further information is if they drill down on this. Then we can say, okay, well, what's the business entity? Let's pull in the addresses, let's pull in the contacts, let's pull in the contact points. And that's at the point at which you do it. But again, you're pulling in weight in that case, not volume. Okay, so I'll reiterate again. The list, we're pulling in volume, not weight. This, we're pulling in weight, not volume. You need to do one or the other. You can't do both. And you certainly can't do a ton of nested searches to get information from that. And I believe that people trying to set this up like this and trying to query that data and pull it into lists is where Bubble gets its reputation for being slow. There are other reasons, let's be honest. I mean, I'm not completely naive to it, but I do believe that a lot of the way that these systems are designed, if you're going to be using Bubble's database, because it doesn't have a join facility, you have to use list types in order to make your systems performant. And again, you're focusing on making it performant rather than making it convenient for you as the developer to have a nice, you know, what we call a normalized database. that kind of goes out the window because of the way that Bubbles database works. But if you're using Bubbles database and you want to make it sing, this is the way that you do it. So okay, so we've introduced now our list types into our data schema. We'll continue with the data schema in the next one. Thanks for watching. Appreciate you sticking with me. Take it easy, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.